This is your daily dose of all things royal. Welcome back, my gorgeous, good-looking friends. I want you to take a look at these BS headlines that are being pumped out about the royal family, Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, and we're going to talk about what they mean. So you see here, for Prince Harry, Mike Tyndall, I knew Prince Harry when he was fun. I mean, literally, this has been dominating the news cycle. The Independent, Mike Tyndall jokes he knew Prince Harry when he was fun in Swipe at Royal. The Mirror, Mike Tyndall makes Prince Harry joke and quips, I knew him when he was fun. Daily Express, Meghan and Harry's money-making move before all the wheels came off. The Mirror again, Harry and Meghan share a rare glimpse inside home, but wedding cake leaves fans baffled. And so on. I mean, this has been going on for 8 years straight, where all of these ridiculous headlines get cranked out, and we all fall for it, over and over and over again. Everybody can see that Meghan's trip to Geneva, focusing on the online harms, has now disappeared. Not much is being said about it. Many of the usual voices online think that it's because Meghan was embarrassed after nobody showed up to see her speak, as well as, some of the photos that came out weren't too flattering. Also, there was quite a bit of backlash of calling Meghan a hypocrite for talking about protecting the kids from online harms, while at the same time she was putting her own daughter out there online. Some of those arguments could have some validity. However, as I've explained in my previous video, Meghan feels no shame, especially when it comes to her doing what she wants, because there has yet to be any kind of accountability. Meghan's status and access, as well as being given these global platforms to speak, have not been affected. These people that she is surrounded by are not challenging her. They are the ones who are making the decisions and moving forward with this globalist agenda. So it really doesn't matter what we feel or what we think or what we say. They don't care. But the moment their power and authority gets challenged, you start to see the dog whistles being pulled out. Oh, these people are racist, they're far right, or they're haters. Anything to dismiss having to debate or be challenged and have to respond. Pay attention to when Harry and Meghan get their lawyers involved. Think back to the specific times when Harry and Meghan chose to do it. Off the top of my head, remember when South Park happened and Harry and Meghan got roasted? Reports were coming out that Harry and Meghan were considering legal action, but for some reason, they never choose to go after media outlets like Star Magazine or Heat or any of the other tabloid magazines that we see on a weekly basis with these stupid headlines. And that's because it's all part of the show. South Park, they couldn't control. Everything else, you better believe they're controlling. I know that this is difficult to hear, but they are controlling people's attention. They're controlling what you think about them, what you say about them, and you see it. These stupid headlines here, everybody's talking about it. But you know what they're not talking about? The progress that they have been making in taking away our fundamental rights. And I can already see that some of you listening to this, your eyes are rolling back into your head thinking, Harry and Meghan don't have any influence. They don't have any power. Nobody takes them seriously. They're not smart enough. That might be true when we talk about Harry and Meghan's intelligence. Like, I don't find Meghan Markle particularly bright. She's definitely not Mensa material. And no, I don't believe that Meghan went to Northwestern and graduated from there. I don't. There are way too many things that just don't add up when it comes to talking about Meghan's formative years, which include the stories that we were told by her alleged family, or I would like to say, supporting cast. I think it's fairly obvious by now, Harry and Meghan are not doing this by themselves. Whoever is behind them have deep pockets as well as top-level resources to pull this all off. Like, we would be stupid to think that Harry and Meghan are the masterminds behind this great plan. No, I certainly don't believe that. But what I do believe is that Harry and Meghan are assets. The question is, who are they assets for? Are they assets for the crown? Are they assets for the UK government? Are they assets for the intelligence community? Or all of the above? I somehow think it's all of the above. Meghan definitely is part of the deep state or is backed by the deep state. Harry is still connected to the crown, and the crown are very much on board with this globalist agenda. When you strip away all the noise and garbage that we are fed on a daily basis to keep us distracted, and you look a little bit deeper into directly what the royal family is doing, the causes that they champion, and compare that to the things that Harry and Meghan have been doing on the down low, they align. The most glaring and recent example that we have here are both Meghan and Duchess Sophie talking about this online harm and pushing for reforms. That's not an accident. We have now seen many examples of this for it to be a coincidence, and I think that if indeed this truly was stepping on the toes of the royal family, there's certainly ways that they could stop it. Like, we're acting as if the royal family is not the most connected family on the planet. They know everybody and have access to everybody. The point that I'm trying to make here is that we all have been so distracted by the antics of this couple that we don't even realize what has been happening under all of our noses. I want to go back and talk about this appearance that Harry made at IAPP. At the time of this speech, how many of you recall the media making a big deal about Harry's appearance here? As I recall, there really wasn't much amplification or discussion about it. I know I briefly touched upon it and said at a later date I was going to make a follow-up video. Well, I never got around to it because every day it's always something. Others also touched upon it, but it was from more of a superficial layer, indicating how much people were paying to attend this event and not really talking about the content or the subject matter in itself and the message that was being delivered. And I think that was a huge miss because the actual message itself should have everybody concerned. And I think that's why not a lot of attention has been given to this because of the backlash. Once people start listening and realizing exactly what Harry and Meghan really are up to, people are going to be mad, not only with them, but also with the royal family. I bet many of you can't even remember when this speech took place because everything feels like a fog with these two. And that is intentional. Harry gave this speech on March 31st of this year. And what was cluttering up the media space on that day? Well, none other than Buckingham Palace's announcement of King Charles visiting the United States. Do I think that was intentional to distract away from what Harry was doing in Washington, D.C.? You bet I do. You may recall on that day, everybody was talking about the king visiting and whether or not Harry was going to get a chance to meet up with his dad since he would be on U.S. soil. I didn't get a chance to talk about the video, but I thought it was important to post what Harry said, and that's all I did was post the speech and figured I would revisit this at a later time. Well, now is the later time. In addition to King Charles's announcement coming to the United States, we also had other distractions, such as the day before, Caroline Graham pops up out of nowhere, writing the story about Thomas Markle falling in love with his 46-year-old Filipino nurse. And then People magazine goes to publish it, and everybody's talking about it, right? I don't know about you, but I don't give a flying fuck about Thomas Markle's 46-year-old Filipino girlfriend. Like, why was this breaking news? And of course, on the same day that Harry is giving this speech and the king dropping this announcement on the days he's coming to the United States, you have Meghan Markle throwing her name into the headlines with this BS story with her former co-star Patrick J. Adams and sending him jam. Now, some say a lot of this distraction with these nonsense articles coming out is to deflect us away from paying attention to the court case in the UK where Harry was essentially exposed for having private conversations with journalists Charlotte Griffiths or G-String Griffiths or whatever her name is, and then also Tom Bower's recent book that was released exposing Harry and Meghan's involvement with George Soros. Now, we already knew the news about George Soros, so that really wasn't a distraction for me, but for everybody else, all of a sudden now it's like Kinsey Schofield is doing some award-winning journalism by having Tom Bower on her show where he disclosed that Soros was involved. Like, duh, the data's already out there. But anyway, this is what was cluttering up the media space at the time. And because we were all so distracted, including myself, nobody was paying closer attention at that time to who these people were that Harry had been talking to. So this organization, the International Association of Privacy Professionals, otherwise known as the IAPP, is a global, nonprofit professional association founded back in 2000. Their focus is on privacy pertaining to AI governance, cybersecurity law, and digital responsibility. And surprisingly, it serves as a leading industry organization for professionals working in data protection compliance and technology governance by offering certifications, training programs, research, and policy resources. And that's a key emphasis there. Because the question everybody has is what qualifies Prince Harry to speak at a conference like this with industry professionals, especially in the legal governance space. Given the fact that not many people were paying attention in the very beginning when Harry showed up here in 2020, Harry's main objective here is to push policy. Now, on November 16, 2021, I specifically raised this issue of Harry interfering with the First Amendment and that his visa should be revoked. Now, the straw that broke the camel's back as to why I was provoked to start this petition was this Aspen Commission on Information Disorder final report that was dropped the day before. After going through and reading this report when it was published, there was a heavy emphasis on regulation and policy reform that really raised some red flags for me. And after watching how Christopher Boozy and the Sussex Squad were attacking people and going after them for their speech, I knew that this needed to stop. Now, I've always maintained my position that we have a UK prince on US soil operating covertly to subvert the US Constitution by supporting, funding groups that are advocating for policy reform. These policy reforms deliberately erode those protections for our God-given rights. Look, I don't care what Meghan and Harry do in their personal life. If Meghan wants to go out there looking like a fool and acting like a fool, that's on her. But the moment it crosses the line and it affects me, I have every right to speak up and criticize it, as should everybody else be doing. But in this case with Harry and Meghan, we have seen over the last 8 years that they don't want people to criticize them. That's why they've desperately gone after so many of us to shut us down, including myself. And the only way to get us to shut up is by getting these laws passed, which brings me now to present day and talking about this event and what Harry said that should scare everybody. Now, I'm going to go ahead and spare everybody by not playing any part of the speech because I think all of us are at a place where we can't stand the sight or sound of these two. But what I am going to do is share with you the write-up that IAPP put out there about Harry's speech and talk through why we should all find this very concerning. This write-up gives us some insight as to why Harry chose this specific conference to speak at. It says here, questions around how to keep privacy and online safety intact are increasingly complex with artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies stepping to the forefront. Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, believes digital governance professionals can ultimately prevail in finding the answers. During an IAPP Global Summit 2026 keynote conversation, Harry said he had no idea there were so many people on digital governance issues while staring out at waves of professionals in attendance. The depth of the field gives him hope that progress can be made on mitigating growing digital harms, which he and his wife, the Duchess of Sussex, formerly known as Meghan Markle, have been tackling through the Parents Network at Archwell Fugazi Philanthropies. Harry's own lived experiences with privacy in the royal spotlight partially contributed to the creation of the Parents Network pilot in 2022. The program aims to connect parents and caregivers that have shared experiences around social media harms, including trauma or suicide. Now, pay attention to how they are reframing this narrative. Originally, when Harry came over in 2020, it was about fighting mis and disinformation as well as hate online. The children's advocacy began years before the network's launch, though. When Harry and Meghan moved to the US in 2020, he said they started to take note of how everyday life was deeply affected by the online landscape, particularly with mental health and well-being. Now, that's a massive lie right there. But you can see how they are trying to revise history and make it seem like Harry and Meghan always were focused on the kids and keeping them safe. They desperately want people to forget that they were a part of this censorship machine in collusion with the Biden regime as well as other governments in censoring any dissenting voices under the guise of fighting mis and disinformation. This goes on to say, You understand very quickly the preventable suffering and how wide that goes, Harry said. The fact that even one child is taking their own life because of the content that is being pushed to them through social media is fundamentally wrong. Every single parent we have spoken to, there was nothing wrong, nothing bad. There was no issue with the child. They were not a naturally vulnerable child. It was because of the time spent on social media and the content being pushed their way. Again, more bullshit. It's not just social media that would drive someone to unalive themselves. What I find really stupid and ignorant here is that Harry doesn't factor in other things that would contribute to someone unaliving themselves, right? Social media is a factor, but it's not the sole reason for many people who decide to just give up. You know what I mean? Now, this is the part that nobody has paid attention and picked up on. It says here, Harry indicated the plaintiffs in recent landmark platform liability cases involving Meta and YouTube are members of the Parents Network. He and Meghan spent time with the impacted parties before and during the proceedings. Let me read that again. He and Meghan spent time with the impacted parties before and during the proceedings. This was the case in California that we talked about, where Meta is suggesting now that age verification needs to happen at the operating system level, putting responsibility into the hands of platforms like Google and Apple. I explained to you, this whole thing is a show. Harry and Meghan behind the scenes coaching the plaintiffs on what to say when the whole argument was bullshit. And then you have Mark Zuckerberg on the surface, going to court, looking all weird and whatnot, loses the case looking like the bad guy, but behind the scenes is the one actually funding the lobbyists who are championing for these age verification laws to have the age verification happen at the operating system level on the device itself. And now what are we seeing? We're seeing various pieces of legislation passing through the states, like here in New York. There's one going through that I told you about, where they want age verification and information about who you are before you can actually use your device and get on the internet. And what I find so evil about this is that even though they say they want to protect your privacy, it really isn't protecting anybody's privacy. You're giving up your anonymity now. Now, I told you why Mark Zuckerberg is in favor of this. He doesn't want to have the responsibility of having to verify age. And at the same time, it also takes out all of those bots so he can make more money with actual eyeballs looking at advertisements. So of course he wants these laws passed. He wants people to give up their privacy. He doesn't care about free speech. The guy's a communist. And what's so crazy to me here is that power could easily be removed from this guy by people just not signing up or using Facebook anymore. This is just another money-making avenue for people. And as Harry says here, Harry expects the legal wins for the aggrieved parties will spur a flood of justice for the thousands of plaintiffs seeking similar redress for platform harms. Now, this is my opinion, but it sure looks to me like this whole court case was a setup. Now, here's the seriousness of this. When people say Harry and Meghan have no influence, Harry and Meghan are responsible for this historic landmark case that just happened. They were involved with the plaintiff. Alarm bells should be going off everywhere if Harry and Meghan are involved. And now it makes sense as to why Harry and Meghan were giving grants to legal organizations. And now it makes sense as to what is going on here. Now, this is the part that I find really concerning. Innovation is a darling word. One of the biggest hurdles to addressing children's online harms, according to Harry, is a child's modern perception of privacy and safety. His childhood privacy experiences took place outside of the social media era, which now ties societal norms and communications to a digital footprint. When I see young people now, they have a different experience of privacy, and they also don't have an option or haven't been given an option, Harry said. I think they care a lot about privacy. They just haven't had to worry about it before. He added, minors' decreased awareness to their privacy rights marks another sign of success for platforms pointing to a circular system of profit based on the harm their systems cause. What I don't like about this write-up is the line where it says his childhood privacy experiences took place outside the social media era. They're talking as if Harry is just like everybody else, when Harry grew up in a completely different world than 99% of us. They're completely ignoring the fact that from the time Harry was in the womb, every moment of his life had been documented. So you can't really apply his experience to anything that normal people experienced before social media. The real issue for Harry and Meghan is not for their kids, it's really about their digital footprint. But I digress. It goes on to say, another area of friction comes with claims that changing the tides for online safety requires sacrifices on growth and innovation. The U.S. is leaning into innovation, particularly with the White House's AI action plan and executive order to limit state AI laws. The EU is also moving to ease aspects of its digital rulebook in the name of innovation and competition. Now, here's the thing. I don't disagree. I think there should be rules and regulations put into place, but to protect the consumer. None of these laws being passed, especially at the state level, really does focus on protecting the data of the individual, especially if there's some kind of breach, who is liable. What we see is this rush to put these laws into place, but it doesn't seem like many people have put thought into what happens afterwards, which leads me to believe that this is really about digital ID and laying the groundwork for that. So once like the operating system has who you are, name, date of birth, your age, they can start classifying you into various categories. And given that Harry and Meghan, as well as these leftist globalists want control of the algorithm, they will then know how to push information out to you on what you should think, how you should feel, and what you should believe, which is very dangerous in my opinion. They want to stop all of this free thinking and debate. That's why Harry hates the word innovation so much. Harry characterized innovation as a darling word and a shield, creating complexity that allows the most powerful companies and power-hungry individuals to avoid changes that might compromise business models. Well, where was your voice on all of this when Biden was in office? Because it sure sounds like the power-hungry individuals that you're pointing the finger at is Donald Trump. Let's not forget that when the table was flipped and the Democrats were in control of all the media outlets, there was no emphasis on reducing online harms and pushing these laws for age verification on a state-by-state basis. Everybody was fine with business as usual because they had control not only of the algorithms, but also the content that people were allowed to see. All other voices of dissent had been canceled. So for Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, that kind of innovation was fine. But for the voices that they couldn't shut up, that's when they wanted to do away with privacy. These are the evil kind of people that want to know who you are so they can go after not only you, but everyone in your orbit. That's why Harry and Meghan have been pushing so hard for these censorship laws to include researchers being given access to user data. So people like Jory Craig and Renee DiResta, and maybe even somebody from the CCDH being given access to user data. And if they're anonymous, their identification. And what concerns me is people like Harry and Meghan could easily open up a spot for a researcher on their team at the Archwell Fugazi Public Charity or philanthropies, and then also have access to people's information. That's the scary part about what Harry and Meghan are pushing for. Not only does Harry hate innovation, but he also does not want any kind of debate. His position says here, it really just creates this public debate. And when things are publicly debated, nothing ever actually happens, he said. And that is a very tactical and strategic choice of the very people that we're trying to convince to change these systems. So, after I read this, the hairs on the back of my neck started to stand up because I started to realize that it wasn't just Harry and Meghan that have this mindset. There's a whole class of people who think that they know better than everybody else and feel like they're the ones to dictate what should happen. And in this case, this is going to affect every single one of us if they get their way, which they are getting their way because we're not paying attention. And the fact that he went ahead and said this goes to show you that Harry does not believe that people have the right to speak freely or should have any kind of debate to challenge his ideas and what we should be doing. So closing out this little write-up by IAPP, it says he also argued the regulations being perceived as burdensome are ultimately a component of meaningful innovation. Regulation is part of innovation, but it's uncomfortable. He said, It talks to the bottom line. It removes the level of control and influence that these companies have. You see, they want regulation only if the regulation benefits them, right? They want to take the control away from the freedom these companies have in a capitalist world. This is exactly what Mike Benz was talking about in the clip that I shared with you yesterday. The idea here is to remove the sovereignty of these companies and be able to place that power in the hands of these NGOs. And at some point, I can see down the road that Archwell Fugazi Philanthropies is looking to get some of that power.
What that does is that removes the sovereignty of the platforms to determine the algorithms. Well, if the platforms aren't sovereign, who is? And what will happen is you will have a government regulatory board staffed up by NGOs and civil society organizations who will be in charge of both auditing the algorithms and reforming, telling the companies how they need to reform their algorithms or design their platforms in order to be in compliance with the laws. So this takes the power over the algorithm that the tech companies had operating in competition with each other in a private market, and it gives all the power to the NGOs, okay? Because the NGOs are that sticky class. They will be considered the subject matter experts.
For Prince Harry, this was always about pushing policy and regulation to control the online space. And this organization that he chose to speak at is one of those organizations that has influence in governance, AI policy, regulation. And if you have a moment, go to their website so you can take a look at all the trackers that they have on the legislations that are passing through, not only in the United States, but also globally. This organization is watching very closely these age verification privacy laws, as well as AI governance, and tracking it state by state. Harry didn't show up at this conference because he's desperate for money. He showed up because he has a purpose, and that purpose involves pushing regulation and policy here in the United States. It's been that since day one. So for anybody to think that Harry and Meghan don't have any influence and that they're massive failures here in the United States, I would rethink that a little bit. Because that historic landmark case that just blew open the lid for other lawsuits to come about will definitely drive these platforms to restrict people's voices, cave in to all of these laws that are being pushed externally. I do agree, though, that there should be laws put around AI governance. However, what I'm not agreeing with are the people who are behind championing it. After everything that we have witnessed and gone through, Harry and Meghan do not have good intentions with what they are driving here. And if we are judging by the company that they keep, neither do any of the other people do. It makes a lot of sense as to why Buckingham Palace chose to release the announcement that the king was visiting at the end of the month. They could have chose the day before, the day after, but they chose the same day that Harry was going to Washington, D.C. to meet with people in the AI governance and legislative industry. Based off of what was going on at that time when Harry gave this speech, I think it makes total sense as to why Harry's speech and his involvement here with this organization was not amplified or made a fuss about in the media. And I think that that was very strategic and intentional. I said this from the very beginning. The optics certainly don't look good. You have a UK prince in the United States advocating to take away privacy and speech rights of Americans. That's not a good look for King Charles. But obviously, Harry is moving full steam ahead in alignment not only with these globalists, but his family. And we're supposed to believe that the palace has not been involved? Come on. I don't mean to burst everybody's bubble, but they lied to us. Megxit is a lie. And that's what I believe. Anyhow, that's all I got for you today. Let me know what you think. Definitely leave your thoughts below. As always, I will be back with more content. But until then, please be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.
It was such a fraud.